الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. One of the things that is important for any person to do is to reflect on their life, the life that they have spent and the life that they will spend in this gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. And the reason for that is that it allows us to not only reflect on our experiences, but to actually learn from them. And this is essential. Learning is essential for growth. And without growth, life becomes stale and monotonous. And so when we look at ourselves, whether it is individually or whether it is as a society or as an ummah today in 2024, 14 centuries after the passing of our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we ask ourselves, what is it that is so different about us and those earlier generations that we call the Salaf Salihin, whether it is the first generations of Sahaba Karam Rizwanullahi Ajma'een, or afterwards you have generations successively coming afterwards, mashallah, who were able to accomplish so much in their deen and in the dunya. So this is a question that we need to ask, because if we look at the physical reality, Allah Ta'ala has given us more ni'mah physically than were present at that time. We are in much more comfort, we are in much more luxury. They had the same amount of time that we have. They had 24 hours a day, we have 24 hours a day. They had needs, human needs associated with them, just like we have human needs to eat, to drink, to have safety, security, to have a family, to be part of a community. And so, the earlier generations um, were exactly like that, right? So physically, they were, I would say, in a more difficult position, meaning they had to work harder when it comes to basic things, just as drinking water or to protect themselves from the elements. Um, so it's much easier now, meaning we have more time. We don't have to spend that time. Um, for example, Hazrat Fatima Zuhra Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anha, Lady Fatima, as we know, she used to spend a lot of time in chores, so much so that she would get blisters in her blessed hands, meaning she would take flour and she would grind them and she would cook them. And the whole process was pretty taxing. It was very physical in nature, right? We don't have to do that. If you want some flour, you can just go to Apna Bazaar, get a bag of flour, come back home, and you have machines that will make the atta for you, and you have electric stoves and ovens, and in a few minutes you can get it. If a person is lazier, they can just go and order some naan, and that's it. So we have to really understand that they were able to accomplish so much more. And the reason for that is that their overall orientation in life was much different. So the generation that we call Salaf Salihin, right? Their orientation in life, their understanding of life, what is life all about? This is what we call teleology. What is the maqsad? So their maqsad-e-zindagi, maqsad-e-hayat, understanding of this gift of life was very different than our understanding of gift of life. So our orientation is different. That's why our our efforts are very much different. So they have the same time, we have the same time. They had necessarily, same or a little more energy. We have similar energy, but they spent it on something else, and we spend it on something else. So I think it requires a little bit of thinking that why is it that we are in a state that we are in, and different people will tell you different answers for this. But one of the answers could be this: that their orientation in general were people who were focused on akhirah, because Rasul Akram sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he brought forth this this opening, this reality that life does not end when you close your eyes. And generally the Arab of that time, they took it as such. That's why if you look at the Quran, the Arabs asked this question, really, that we will die and then we will be raised up again, right? So Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam, brought forth this concept of akhirah, very elaborate, that no, this life does not just end when you close your eyes. There is a life afterwards, and that life is the eternal life. There is accountability, there is reward, there is punishment, there is Yawmul Hashr, there is a whole living afterwards. A living that can be most beautiful living, blissful living, or it can be most tormented living, depending on how we live our lives. Right? So Sahaba Kiram, Rizwanullahi Ajma'in, and Salaf Salihin, they were very much focused on the akhirah. And our orientation is different. We have left akhirah as the focal point, and we have made the dunya the focus of all of our efforts. Dunya focused. And this is because where we live in, usually everybody is focused on the dunya. So we just learn from the society, we learn from where we are, from our environment. And so if you look at, all of our efforts, mihnate, mujahida, is for the sake of dunya. So that is a big difference. And we have understood it in some other places. For example, because their focus was so much on akhirah, Allah Ta'ala had given the Sahaba Kiram Rizwanullahi Ajma'in and the Salaf Salihin afterwards what we call akle ma'ad. This was a very different kind of akal, intellect, that they always used to calculate. They always used to make decisions on uh, based on akhirah in their mind. And what do we do now? We base all of our decisions, meaning all of our intellect, is based on what we call akle ma'ash, which is dunyavi, benefit, loss, benefit, loss, benefit, loss. That is why it is much easier for us to move to a different state if we will get a good job. It is easy for us to move to a different place if there's a good university there, right? It is easier for us to move to a different state if we find that, we'll get a bigger house, right? Because those necessarily are dunyavi benefits, right? On the other hand, if you look at the life of our elders, they would make decisions based on the akhirah. So they will, look for the best masjid or the madrasa or the khanaqah or, the suhbat of salihin and things like that. And it was easy to make that decision. So the question becomes why? And it is because they had trained themselves. Of course, their spirituality is part of the ruhaniya and all of that. But at the end of the day, the ta'aleem, the tarbiyah, whatever that process was, had trained them to focus on their akhirah and to make their decisions based on the akhirah. And our ta'aleem, our tarbiyah, done by our school systems, our colleges, our friends that we hang out with, the media that we're exposed to, what do? That we focus all of our efforts on the dunya. बहुत ज़्यादा ये हो चुका हुआ. This is like very common, and we have put on these glasses and we like to think in those terms. So it becomes very ajib right? It becomes very ajib that like somebody, even if somebody tells us that brother do this, you will get this and on the day of judgment, you're like, oh, okay. I can't wake up during the night, so I can't do it. But if somebody tells you that, wake up during the night and in the morning you'll get a new iPhone, the decision is already made. We don't have to think about it twice. Hmm? That's the difference in psychology. So it's a psychological difference. Their focus, our focus, their efforts and our efforts. Right? And if you build on that, this is why you find that the earlier generations, there were very much people of ruhaniyah, spiritual people, spiritual beings, spiritual creatures. Again, because of that, because they were akhirat focused, they would bring into their life actions and they would bring into their life habits that would increase in their ruhaniyah. So very spiritual people, mashallah. And um, on the other hand, we have made matter materialism. Materialism is it's actually like a philosophical sort of worldview where we take that as our focal point. So their focus point was akhirah and ruhaniyah. Our focus point is dunya, and because it's dunya, materialism has really become the focal point of all of our efforts. Now, materialism is what? That the only thing that you can say for sure is matter. Anything that is metaphysical is just in your mind, it's just in your head, it doesn't really exist, it's very subjective. What really exists? Meaning, so this is like an ontological question. What exists? To them, a materialistic view is that only physical world that we can measure, usually through empiricism, empirical means, that is the world that only exists. So make your effort in discovering it. So if you look at all the research in the dunya, right? What is the research going on? All the research is, whatever sciences you look at is research on matter. Research on matter, right? Everything to do with that. It was very interesting. Not too long ago, I mean, it's been over 10 years, but something that was probably not that prevalent in late 90s, but in early 2000s, late 2000s, you found that organizations started talking about the concept of mindfulness. Became very common. Mindfulness, mindful practices. They will even bring in, the concept of meditation. And now this was not present. I mean, maybe there were some organizations in general who would just focus, but in general it was not present. And then you saw like wholesale adoption of it. Now, the example was interesting because in the deen, in the ruhaniyah, you have a similar concept, what we call huduri, mindfulness, right? Presence. Meditation of zikr and things like that, being in a state of muraqabah and muhasibah, etc. But again, our deen looks at it from the perspective of akhirah, ruhaniyah. There, because everything is dunya and everything is materialistic, what was very interesting was like all that conversation about mindfulness was all about how does it make you a more productive person? Meaning, how can you achieve more in matter? Right? If you're not focusing in your work, in your job, do few of these practices, and all of a sudden, your creative juices will flow. They will literally say this. If you don't feel you're creative enough, then you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And it will help you be more, meaning more materialistic. Your quest for matter will become much better now. So even that, it was very much extremely matter focused. So materialism is a philosophical, it's a paradigm. Now you will find that some of even Muslims have adopted that, so much so that they will use their deen not in the quest for akhirah and ruhaniya, but in the quest for dunya as well as materialism. They'll use, I mean, dini means deen, which is supposed to be all about the divine, metaphysical akhirah. Now, because our talim and tarbiyat, or whatever the training is, we are so different that unlike our Salaf Salihin, who would even use their dunya for their deen, we use deen for our dunya, for our materialistic pursuits. So समझ में लग रही है कि एक अजीब सा एक difference है. This is a difference. You know, Sahaba Kram Rizwanullah has been very different. They weren't like that. They would use their dunya for their deen because of that focal point of akhirah. We use our deen, which is apparently supposed to bring you close to Allah Ta'ala, you know, etc., etc., we use it for dunya. I have a good voice, oh, mashallah, now I will use it for dunyavi gains. I'm a beautiful qari and I will use this, or I'm a nasheed khan, naat khan jisko kehte hain, right? So before it was just you can sit alone and think about your beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam and read beautiful poetry, and it would increase in your ruhaniyat. Right? तरक्की होती थी एक अल्लाह एक नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की मोहब्बत एक इश्क जोश मारता था अंदर. Now you use it, so in a very literal sense, people can, drop money on you, and you see that people are reciting nasheed and people are throwing money at them. Right? This is what I'm talking. This is you're using your deen because you're so dunyavi focused. You're using it for your dunya, for your material ambitions. देखिए एक difference तो नजर आता है. Right? So similarly, our Salaf Salihin and Sahaba Kiram, because of that, because of Ruhaniya, you found that they were very much, they would build their batin and ikhlaq. So necessarily the result was that they had a lot of sifat. They had a lot of sifat, people of sifat, and beautiful sifat, generosity and kindness and compassion and self-sacrifice, and I mean, you name it. You name it and they had it. Because batin mattered to them. So batin was a focal point for all of them. And on the contrary, for us, the zahir has become the focal point. Even from an individual perspective, now we are more concerned, how do I look? How do I look? And, how do I dress or how do I do it? Rather than what Allah Ta'ala looks at, we're not that concerned about that anymore. The batin, the shakal inside. We're not, as long as other human beings consider us to be pious and virtuous and neek and saleh and all of that, that's all that matters. And regardless if our actions are devilish in nature and our solitude is not pure and we lack haya and there's no sidq, there's none of that. So that's the difference. They were focused on batini tarakki. We are focused on very much our zahir. ज़ाहिर बस अच्छा होना चाहिए और ये मर्दों में भी औरतों में भी है. Right? औरतों में भी है. Right? How many women or men you'll find that they take it upon themselves that I want to make my inner self beautiful. But ज़ाहिर में ऐसा होना चाहिए, ज़ाहिर में ऐसा होना चाहिए, ज़ाहिर में. It's very different. Again, it just stems from, do you understand? Like it's stemming from the same, if you want to call it epistemology, which is like a source of knowledge, but it's really like, like how do you kind of learn? So learning has been so different, which we call talim or tarbiyat, that that sort of like dunya materialism results in just focus on the outer self. Akhirat centric, meaning your spiritual ruhaniya, and then you are focused on your batin. ठीक है? इसी का एक end result you'll find that if you boil it down to actual faculties, our Salaf Salihin were people that were called Ahle Dil. Because they were internal focused, they had very strong hearts. Because they had very strong hearts, not the physical again, because we're thinking the qalb was so strong, that's why iman was strong. And because iman was strong, the tawakkul on Allah Ta'ala was strong. And because the tawakkul on Allah Ta'ala was strong, they were able to accomplish so much more. For us, the qalb is extremely weak. Because the qalb is weak, iman is weak. Because the iman is weak, yaqeen is there. Right? Dhilmil, you know. And because of that, tawakkul is not there. It's just not there. And it manifests itself in our daily lives. Right? So they were people who would strengthen their imans. They would strengthen their hearts. कैसे करते थे? जिक्र करते थे, इबादत करते थे, सारा कुछ करते थे. It would really, there were people of strong tawajjuhat and tasarrufat. And, this is a hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his ru'ub, his awe, that magnificence, it used to travel at a distance of 3 months from him. Right? That is the quwwat qulub. Right? The qalb that was so strong that it would affect the person sitting next to them. So now it's more, everything is just like an intellectual exercise. So we have brought all of our focuses, even our deen, it's not there to strengthen our qalb. It is there so it's, my understanding is good and I can go give a good bayan and I'm an articulate speaker and I can articulate things in much, much better way. And so the way that even the deen is perceived is different. शुरू में वो दीन क्या होता था? दिल को मजबूत करने. आज दीन क्या है? It's all about an academic, intellectual exercise. Just like our colleges. You have subjects, you take courses, you go from one subject to another subject to another subject. Even Dini pursuit has become that. That it's just you taking some subjects and you're increasing your intellectual capacity, your what they call like critical thinking, analytical analysis. That you're able to, mashallah, it sounds like they're not smart. They're very smart, extremely smart people. Like you start talking to them and they'll bring in concepts from various sciences of the deen and you're like, oh, mashallah, isko to bada kuch aata hai. But again, when you look at sifat, when you look at the qalb, and when you look at, the connection with Allah, the ta'alluq, with all the things that we spoke about even last time, qurb of Allah Ta'ala, anabat ilallah, being a muqarrab and ruju ilallah, it's just not there. It's just not there. It's very ajib. It's 100% absent. And seemingly, it is with people who are, very much considered to be what? Now, we can call them scholars, people of ilm, people. But again, look at the paradigm. It's because the dunya focus, because, all of those things are there. That has really, really shifted. That has shifted the way that even deen works now. So it's a subtle point. I hope it's getting through. But it really starts from the basic way of how the world is perceived. And then it just translates down. Everything gets affected. ठीक है? तो थोड़ा सा समझ में लगा या नहीं लगा? सही है? एक साइड पर क्या है? Akhirat focused. Akhirat is a concept, right? If you look at even the Christian tradition and even the Jewish tradition, it's not as strong, especially in the Jewish. I mean, Christianity has what eschatology, and they have a little bit of kingdom of God and things like that. But if you look at the Muslim paradigm, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, whether you look at the Quran, how the Qiyamah will come and life after death, and especially life after. I remember when I was a young kid, I came across a book, a small book. It was like an orange cover. It said like Maut ka manzar, marne ke baad kya hoga, right? And I remember, when I read through it, it was just like a collection of hadiths. Now, whether they were all sahih hadiths or not, I don't know. I was too young. But I mean, collection, there were some stories of Salaf Salihin, but in general, it was collection of hadiths, and it was broken down in terms of you know, people who were righteous and then people who were not righteous. It was halat of the Jannat and then halat of Jahannam. And I remember when I read through that, I कहते हैं कि टिकले की तरह सीधा सीधा हो गए. Hmm? At least for a month or so, just it really straightened you up. Right? Because again, it changes that paradigm, like the way that you look at life. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught that. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us to be akhirat centric. And so the first few generations, they, and again, like I will bring what I said last time. It doesn't mean that you don't engage in dunyawi pursuits. No, no, no. It doesn't make that you don't, have a career, you don't have a business. And we have explained this all. I don't need to like keep on repeating. Sahaba Karam Rizwanullah Ajmahin, I would say most of them, 95, 99% of them, they all had their, what we call a career. But usually they were businessmen, so they had their businesses, they had their, they had land that they grew on, right? Fadaq was there, Khaybar was there, that even Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you know, um, he used to get proceeds from that as well. Right? So there is that. But we're thinking in terms of how does a person make decisions in their life, right? So they were akhirat centric in their decision making. And this is, whenever how does it benefit my akhirat? And, modern society and even modern Muslim, it has changed and shifted that our efforts are dunya for the sake of dunya. Right? They had dunya for the sake of akhirah. So our dunya is for, and I'll tell you this, I engage with a lot of PIs and researchers at, the universities, various universities, and, they make a lot of effort. They make a lot of effort. Subah se raat tak, they have their labs there, but they are seeking it for the sake of dunya. So there's always, I want to be published in Nature, I want to be published here, and I want to get grant X and this much money and this. Right? So the effort is there, but it is for the sake of. Now, a Muslim researcher would make the effort too, but they would be making the same effort for the sake of their akhirah. ठीक है ना? हम वही होगा, लेकिन हमारा जो एक नीयत उसके पीछे होती है, that is आखिरत, that is getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ठीक है ना? So this sort of like ladder, if you just, go from there, akhirat versus dunya, spirituality versus, materialism that we spoke a little bit about as a philosophical sort of like paradigm of being, inner self versus focusing only on outer self, right? Inner self, conscious, meaning rather than becoming people of sifat, characteristics, ikhlaq, beauty, ihsan, taqwa, right? It is all about how do I look outside, what do I wear, what car I'm driving, etc., etc., etc. And eventually, you find that rather than developing their qalb, their iman, it becomes a pursuit of what? Just intellectual or academic pursuits, basically. ठीक है? तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा difference आपको नजर आएगा. So I want us to kind of take this sort of framework, and then every time that we look at or read the Sirah, or whether we read lives of the Sahaba Kiram Rizwanullahi Ajma'een, of Salaf Salihin afterwards, right? All the early generations. If you just bring this perspective, you will find that mostly, like obviously, you always find exceptions. You'll always find, even in the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, even in Medina Munawwara, there were munafiqeen that were present there. Of course there were. But munafiqeen were the exceptions, right? In the generations afterwards, you always found people that obviously did not act in the best way. But you cannot overall the general the general orientation was always like that. Okay? And you will find that. So now the question becomes, why are we talking about this? Well, I think one of the reasons that we as an ummah are in this predicament is because of that. If akhirat does not matter to me, why would I make any decisions that will benefit it? right? Why will I make any benefit? If the dunya is all in all, materialism is all in all, material, progress is everything to me, that's all I'm going to focus on, right? And if I'm not concerned about my inner self, if I don't want to learn self-sacrifice, then why would I? Why should I sacrifice for you, for you, for you? My time, my energy, my anything. Right? And this sort of it develops it because the whole concept of individualism actually kind of came down from that. As long as you had some traditional deen leading your way, people were still sort of like focused on the other. How do I benefit others? How do I work for others? How do I do that? And as soon as all of that was like shut, that door was shut, when materialism just became everything, now you have to give tax breaks, right? Meaning you give to certain causes and it will give you a tax break. So you're bringing in a material benefit rather than no, this is the right thing to do and feed others, etc., etc. So that has been brought in as well. And as I mentioned, that has been brought in our dini discourse, so much so that we will use our deen for our dunya, our deen for our material pursuit, and that is problematic. ठीक है, तो हमने क्या बनना है? हमने अहले दिल बनना है. Ahle dil, people of heart, rather than just people who are focused on our intellectual pursuit. तो इंशाल्लाह ताला, if we make that change, इंशाल्लाह आप देखेंगे हर चीज़ will start to fit in. दिल पे मेहनत करें, you will find that your inner self will become better. Your inner self becomes, all the sifat will. If I am sakhi, if I'm not self-centered, then I will worry about what's going on in the world. गजा में क्या हो रहा है, सीरिया में क्या हो रहा है, फलां जगह, फलां जगह, फलां जगह. And if I don't, if I am self-centered, right, if I don't care about sifat, good qualities, characteristics, why should I care? ठीक है, जो हो रहा है वो मुझे तो नहीं ना हो रहा. Why should I care about what's happening to them or anybody else? People take it to the nth degree. Why should I care? My parents, they live their life. Why should I care about them? What happens to my brother or sister? This is very ajeeb thinking, but you have to really trace it back to what is really wrong at the crux of it. We are Muslims. We don't think like that. Our ta'aleem and tarbiyat should reflect, should change, ताकि हमारे अंदर ये चीज़ पैदा हो. Okay? And even in akhirah, I will, take it one step further, because I started in akhirah in the dunya, but eventually, even akhirah is all about Allah, right? Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the pivot around which our life revolves. And the other lifestyle is just void of divine presence. Okay? So atheism will kind of give, if you take it one step even before that, because we have this deistic kind of existence. We believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah ta'ala is at the center of everything we do. That's why akhirat is at the center of everything that we do, and that's why spirituality and inner self and working on the heart is at the center of it. If there is no Allah, right, then it's just focus becomes the dunya, focus becomes materialism, focus becomes outer self, and focus just becomes intellect. ठीक है ना? तो बस हमारे इसीलिए कहते हैं अल्लाह से मोहब्बत करो, अल्लाह से ताल्लुक़ कायम करो. ठीक है, तो जब ये हम करेंगे तो इंशाअल्लाह ताला you will find that everything, Lego pieces नहीं होते, it will just, all the pieces of the puzzle will fit together इंशाअल्लाह ताला. तो अल्लाह ताला से दुआ है कि अल्लाह ताला मुझे, आपको, हम सबको अल्लाह ताला समझ अता फरमाए. अल्लाह ताला हमें अपना ज़ौक़ शौक़ नसीब फरमाए. अल्लाह ताला हमारी ज़िंदगी के अंदर ऐसे आ जाए कि हमारा हर चीज़, हमारा देखना, हमारा बोलना, हमारा सोचना, हमारा महसूस करना, हर चीज़ बदल जाए, हर चीज़ बदल जाए. तो अल्लाह ताला आ जाते हैं ज़िंदगी में तो there's such a transformative change that happens. Transformative change that happens. हर चीज़ इंसान की बदल जाती है. हर चीज़ बदल जाती है। तो यही हम चाहते भी हैं कि इंशाल्लाह ताला बदले। तो अल्लाह ताला हम सबको इंशाल्लाह नसीब फरमा दे। आमीन या रब्बल आलमीन व आखिरु दावाना अनिल हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन।